Yes,
Okay, perfect.
that's much, much better. And I believe that we are now live.
Oh,
So,
yay!
Stephanie
Wait,
and Jeremy,
are we
Hey,
really
Nick.
live though? Are we
well,
unalive?
well,
We're
yeah,
unalive.
I don't know. I don't know if there's any distinction anymore between live and dead. Um, but
We're
yes,
just going through with inertia.
yeah. Well, yeah. So today's topic is the zombie apocalypse. And I know this is something that was close to Jeremy's heart, and it's part of popular culture, and there's a history and pedigree to all of this. So I think there's a lot to talk about. Um,
Mhm.
I thought that before we get into the popular culture aspects of this and symbolism of zombies, that we could talk just a little bit about where the idea of the zombie comes from. And my understanding is mostly it's out of Haiti, and it's connected to voodoo or voodoo. There's possibly African roots for it, but it appears largely in Haitian folklore. And zombie just meant something like a spirit, maybe even a ghost. But eventually it has these connotations of, the living dead. There also seems to be a connection with slavery,
Mhm.
which I found interesting because on the plantations, a lot of the sort of I don't know the proper term, like the managers were also slaves, and they would use the threat of zombification to the other slaves to pacify them, to keep them in line, and to prevent them from running away. So it's like, well, if you do that, you're going to end up a zombie,
Right.
which takes away your free will. It takes away
Right.
any autonomy. Um,
Mhm. You can choose to be a slave, or we will make you be a slave.
right, right. Um, the and I don't have a lot of information about folklore on this. My experience has largely been with Wade Davis in his book, The Serpent and the Rainbow, which I read a long, 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 long time ago. I read it after the release of the Wes Craven horror movie that was loosely based on The Serpent and the Rainbow. But Wade Davis I think he's an anthropologist. He was
Mm-hmm.
studying at Harvard, and he argued that what was going on with the zombification process is that you have these voodoo sorcerers, not priests necessarily, but these sort of sorcerers. What they're doing is they're making up a like a powder, and the two primary ingredients. One is the tetrodotoxin, which is a
Hmm.
neurotoxin from the pufferfish.
Yeah.
And I was trying to remember. I think it's actually from the ovaries, the female ovaries, but I'm not positive about that. It's been a long time. And then the other aspect is datura, and datura is a deliriant that is used by some shamans, and not just in
Right.
Haiti, but it's also in Nepal, for example. The Nepalese shamans will use datura, and my understanding is that the sorcerer would like place this powder like on a threshold or something, and the person, it only will work if they're walking barefoot, but the powder will get absorbed through the soles of the feet. And then what happens is they get sick and then apparently die, but they are not dead, even though they won't show that they're breathing or that there's a heart rate. Um, but they're fully conscious,
Hmm.
and they go through the whole funeral, and they are buried alive. And after a
Hmm.
couple of days, the sorcerer will come and dig them up, and the person then is believes that they died, and
Right.
that now that they're a zombie. Um,
Right, and just to clarify, they do still show signs of life, but their metabolism is slowed to the point where it's imperceptible to non-modern science,
Okay.
and that's why I thought they're dead.
All right. Thank you. Um, my understanding is that the what Wade Davis has claimed has been critiqued by some, but no one has really offered a good alternative explanation as to what
Hmm.
was going on. And I think that the criticism is that Davis says that the sorcerer has to keep the person, kind of has to keep dosing them with something to keep them zombified. Um, but I think what also plays part here is just the cultural belief in zombies.
Hmm.
Because belief can do nasty things.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
just because someone believes something, it can affect reality and in very
Right.
profound ways.
And
Um,
if you see someone digging you out of your grave, there's some pretty strong beliefs of what happened there.
yeah, for sure, for sure. I
Hmm.
That's one of my personal nightmares is being buried alive. Um,
Mm.
not giving anyone ideas.
Yeah, I'm coming to Denver next.
Yeah. Um, so the idea of the zombie, from what I've read, a little bit of the research, it first really kind of entered into the, I'll just say, I don't know, the industrial North's consciousness around 1819. And
Okay.
there were a few mentions here and there, but of course, where zombies really entered the imagination of the Western industrial North was in 1968 with George Romero's Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there were a couple zombie films that were earlier than that, but that is the one that really broke it open.
yeah, yeah. Do you know why?
I don't know why, but it wasn't popular and it was a commercial failure when it was released. It wasn't until later on that it really started catching on. Um,
My
one thing
understanding
kind of,
is, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I was going to say my understanding is that it's actually one of the most successful films, horror films ever, because the original budget was only like $100,000,
Right,
and it's
right,
raked in like millions upon millions.
right. Yeah, over the course of decades, but when it
Yeah.
was released, it was not successful at all.
Mm, yeah.
Before that, wasn't like in literature the concept, or in Bram Stoker's Dracula, wasn't Renfield kind of like a, I don't know if he was a zombie, but sort of uh, forced into a position of slavery to
Mm,
Dracula?
Well, he was under Dracula's thrall, right?
right,
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
certainly wasn't living dead. He was just
Right.
alive and enslaved, which ties into what we're talking about as well, forced to do things against your will.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Eating bugs, and whatnot.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I actually rewatched Night of the Living Dead in preparation for this, or most of it. And I was reading some of the not early reviews, but in particular, there was Roger Ebert's comments because apparently at the time, this was released just before the rating systems, our current rating systems, went into effect. So it was released as unrated.
Hmm.
And Roger Ebert noticed or wrote that, the first half was like this thrilling, horror movie, but then all of a sudden, midway through, it just got gory. And there were children in the audience and just like sobbing because no one knew that this wouldn't be appropriate. Um,
Hmm.
uh, and I think that that's one place where there is the cultural influence is that the gore that was there in the
Right.
very first episode. Um,
Mhm.
uh,
Right. and that is in the '60s, right? Which is the height of the exploitation movie, or at least,
Yeah.
I mean, that's when gore and sex and stuff really entered the mainstream.
Hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of the exploitation came out after the rating systems.
Hmm.
I could be wrong on that.
Right, right.
Yeah, Night of the Living Dead was released in 1968. So,
Hmm.
um,
Okay.
yeah. Um, One of the things that I think is always interesting, and we can comment on this throughout, is the cause of the zombie apocalypse. And in Night of the Living Dead, it was a space probe, I think, that
Right,
was returning from, was it Venus? That when it came back into the atmosphere, that's what led to the resurrection of the dead.
right. And it released radiation, if I remember correctly.
Right, right,
This
right.
radiation that raised the dead,
Yeah.
which to our scientific minds is absolutely ludicrous, but at the time it was interesting.
Well, yeah, I guess that speaks to the horror of the atomic age,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's sort of
Right,
like,
right,
what brought about the Godzilla films, maybe for us brought about the zombie films.
right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
And
I
also,
also.
this was a rural setting, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right. So
it
there's that
was.
whole idea of the city versus the country, and the scientific age is emblematic of the modern progress, while the rural settings are more. I don't know how to say that. You know
Hmm.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's something.
Yeah. Yeah. That could very well be. I also think that it's important to note that the lead was African American man, Dwayne Jones,
Hmm.
and I think that there's a lot of commentary about that. My understanding is that Romero is like not necessarily suggesting that he was chosen because he was an African American, but rather he
Hmm.
was chosen because he just auditioned the best.
Right.
Um, but nevertheless, at the end of the film, he's like the lone survivor. But then you have all of these country folk who find him in the basement of this house and they kill him.
Right.
And that's something that Roger Ebert also commented on. I think it was Ebert um, that this also had an effect on the audience, especially the younger audience, because you're always so used to the hero making it to the end, and
Hmm.
here the hero is killed by
Right.
a group of people. And it
Hmm.
seems like even if it was unintentional, the symbolism is of a lynching.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Also, what's worse? You know,
Yeah.
if
The
they were a group
zombies are
of
the human.
humans who killed him, not the zombies, right?
Right.
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 Right. And that's kind of that theme goes through almost every zombie movie. Who is worse, the zombies or the humans? Especially when we
Hmm.
get up to like The Walking Dead, which I
Yeah.
think we have to get to eventually.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
But there used to be a lot of different explanations for why zombies were coming back. If you look through like nasty chemicals, religious stuff, and all this, viruses and cordyceps are a fungus are more of a modern interpretation of how zombies are generated now, because
Yeah.
we're trying to justify that sort of fear with our rational scientific mind and a modern understanding of how these things work.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. There was a quote. I forget where I got this from, but it was something about white science versus black magic.
Mm, okay.
Um, which I found interesting. But yeah, it
Mhm,
speaks to the cultural concerns and the temporary concerns
mhm,
of cultures. Um, Something about viruses. That viruses themselves, and this is something we'll get into a little bit, um, but viruses themselves, the question is, a virus is neither living or dead. It's
right,
this
right.
in between sort of thing,
Mhm,
and it challenges categories, and that's something that I want to talk about a little bit later when we get to some of the philosophy of zombies, because I know that Stephanie has Zizek and I've got a little bit of Derrida. Um, I wonder if
Mm-hmm.
Carl Raschke has written about zombies.
Yeah, if he
Because
hasn't, he's missed something.
well, those are his two heroes. And Carl
Okay.
Raschke is at the University of Denver, which is where we all did our graduate degree in religious studies. For anyone who's wondering
Mhm.
why I bring up this person's name, um,
Uh, if I can interrupt, we have a comment from Samantha Chippington
yeah,
that the Native Americans prophesied of a time when the mind virus named Watiko would infect all of humanity, putting them into a sleep state without free will.
right,
And yeah,
Mm,
I agree. That's very relevant to this,
mm,
right.
as we talk about consumerism and capitalism and that mind virus that puts us all to sleep and keeps us all
mm,
zombified in some inertial state of
Per-
consuming. And
mm-hmm,
right.
yeah,
Perpetual motion.
yeah. Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, I've had Paul Levy on the Rebel Spirit Radio podcast a couple of times to talk about Watiko, and I agree that that's very relevant because it robs us of our agency, but it's also something that's self-created. You know, that it's a cultural
Right.
creation
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
we could easily diminish. Yeah. Yes, Jeremy. I think Jeremy froze with his
Oh,
hand up.
Yeah.
am I here now?
Yes.
Am I here
Yeah.
now?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about cultural relevance and technological advancement, and what about social media?
Hmm.
Is that a whole nother thing we need to talk about later, or is this a modern zombie apocalypse?
Well, I don't know. What can you say a little bit more about what you're thinking?
A lot of people that are they're chasing likes and subscribes and stuff like that. By the way,
Mm,
like and subscribe this channel.
yeah.
Um, but there's people, we're just walking around London. I'm walking around and we're seeing people. I'm just seeing people walking around and stepping off the street because they're looking at their phone,
Mm,
or we're going out at restaurants and we see kids just staring at their phone while their parents just watch them and kind of like, well, what do I do with this thing?
yeah.
Hmm.
Some way, it's not a connection with this world. It's a part live and a but
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
this may
certainly
be a
in a,
defeat.
no, I think we're certainly in a position right now where we are not fully cognizant of everything that's going on. We're ignoring real problems and only looking at new shinies
Mm,
and sort of blindsided by different political movements going on that are really
mhm.
um, creating uh, a, an existence that perpetuates this zombification of the populace, right?
Mm,
Um,
Right.
you know, I think in a different time we might have seen more uprising than we're seeing right now because I think most of us are pacified. We're not really paying
Right.
attention, and if you are paying attention, you're a killjoy. you know so
Right.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, we're just kind of shuffling through our lives, and in this
Right.
scenario, we're the ones who are the zombies. Right. And that's,
Hmm.
this is jumping ahead. We'll kind of go back to the Romero films, but Shaun of the Dead. That's the whole point of the first part of the film is that Shaun, and I forget Nick Frost's character's name, but mostly Shaun,
Yeah.
he's oblivious to this unfolding zombie apocalypse because he's just kind of going through the motions and everything. Um,
Mhm.
I thought about. I wish I could have a cornetto here, drumstick or something to eat. Just in honor, in honor. Um, so yeah, I really like the connection with Tico, and I'm glad that our viewer mentioned that. Is there anything else before we go to sequel, the first sequel to Night of the Living Dead. Anything else about that original film um,
No.
in terms of zombies?
We covered everything I thought of, so I
Yeah.
think I'm happy there.
Okay. Yeah, the only thing, I mean, mostly for me, the thing that has stuck forever in my head is they're coming to get you, Barbara.
Yep.
All right. So it was almost 10 years later, or maybe it was 10 years later, when Romero filmed the sequel, which was Dawn of the Dead. And
Hmm.
here, Dawn of the Dead has very definite symbolic meaning, and it's shifted from where it was
Right.
in 68 to where it is in 78. And my understanding is that Romero said that it wasn't intentional, that he did not
Hmm.
have an intention to have this symbolic meaning. Now, I could be wrong on that, but Dawn of the Dead takes place in a shopping mall.
Right. Hmm.
And so, what is the symbolism here? What's going on in Dawn of the Dead?
Well, my thought on the symbolism there is, and of course, if he's saying that, no, I didn't really think of that, I think it still could be relevant because we talk about certain themes, certain ideas that pop out in the collective unconscious through our pop
Right.
culture,
Right.
right? So you have
Hmm.
this mall, which, is what, overrun. And this, I think that to me sounds clear to this mindless consumerism, right? That we're just, zombies are just going to do what zombies do. They're going to eat. And whatever they can find, because they're it's just like a base habitual thing that they do, because that's the only part of the brain that's working, that need to eat, need to
Yeah.
consume. So we could pair that very well with how we mindlessly consume things, in our culture. And I know I'm guilty of it. I sometimes will
Hmm.
get on Amazon and I'll sit there and I'll like buy crap that I probably don't need. And, then I have it and it, you know, sits in a corner and I don't use it, right? How many of us have stuff that we've bought that we just thought we needed it at the time?
Right. Well, and
Um,
there's also
Go ahead.
the imagery of the day after Thanksgiving, of the hordes
Mhm.
of people going to the malls, not so much malls anymore, but at least Walmart and whatnot, to get those deals. And it's
Right.
often compared to zombie hordes, trying to smash
Hmm.
through the windows, and it's that unthinkingness, and
Mhm.
that materialism, the consumption.
Hmm. Right. That whole idea of unthinking consumptions reminds me of ants in a way.
Yeah.
There's some biologists that talk about what are called social animals. You are social animals, social, um, which are more of a collective than they are an individuals that work as a group. So a collective organism, like ants, the hive is considered largely the organism, and each individual ant doesn't do anything on its own. The only other species that scientists talk about as social are human beings. That we have a collective mentality that's stronger in a lot of cases than our own individuality. So we get wrapped into these things like consumption, fads, trends, fashion, etc., like this, partially because we have a strong collective identity.
Hmm.
Yeah, and just try in a group of people challenging that belief system.
Right.
That there's a
Right.
problem with that belief system, that we're this endless growth, um, capitalistic model. You challenge it and you get immediate pushback of, you're
Hmm.
just a um, tree hugging communist tippy, So, you get marginalized for bringing up that there's a problem with this. We can't keep doing this. And that's part of that collective, right? There's that,
Hmm.
or even Watiko, if you want to bring that back. It's nope. This is how it's done. This is how it's always been done, and um, this is the way. This is our way, and
Right.
it's like, well, it doesn't have to be our way, and see how well that goes over.
Right. Yeah, and what came to my mind was, and this is, we didn't talk about this, and they're not really seen as zombies, but it is this sort of hive mind idea, is the Borg out of Star Trek.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
was like, you will be assimilated.
Hmm. Right. Which kind of raises the question: what is a zombie? A zombie. I mean, there's different ways to define that. But if you think about it as a non-thinking human being,
Mm.
or a being that's part of a collective rather than an individual agent acting on its own volition, then suddenly there's a lot of things that are zombie like Borg.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, there are a lot of people don't think or question. Well, and yeah, I mean, it's true,
Hmm.
and and we all are guilty of this. Like Steph said, that I've also ordered stuff off of Amazon that I probably didn't need,
Right.
and it's just part of this culture that we are embedded in. That,
Hmm.
um, but yet once you start saying, this is leading to maybe possibly the extinction of the human species, um, no one wants to hear it.
Right.
And to comfort ourselves, what do? We go and we buy more stuff,
Hmm.
because it's become a balm of sorts,
Right.
And I knew one person who used to refer to Target as her happy place.
Oh
And
my.
I thought, that's so sad. That's so
Hmm.
sad. Um, I wanted to, maybe we can pause here for a second in terms of some of the religious ideas here, because I think that there is a direct correlation with Christianity in the sense of resurrection.
Yes.
But there's another connection, and I wouldn't say that these are zombies per se, but it's in the Buddhist tradition, and it's
Mm.
the Preta Loka, and Preta Loka means hungry ghost.
Yeah.
Mm.
And there's a whole realm. There's it's called the Buddhist Wheel of Life, right? And there are, I think, 6 different realms, and these are realms that you can be reincarnated into. And there's the realm of the Preta Loka, and the Preta Loka, it's a hell realm of sorts.
Hmm.
And the Preta Loka are described as having like these tiny, 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 tiny little mouths. And one description is, but their bellies are like the size of Everest, right?
Hmm.
And what they do is they crave all the time to consume.
Right.
And some of it is even there's karmic aspects to it. So there was one.
Right.
This is amazing. Some of the Buddhist sutras. This one sutra about a woman who ended up as a Preta Loka, and all she would do is eat shit. Um,
Hmm.
because that's what it was karma, because she fed that to someone else. And it was this idea of what leads to becoming a Preta Loka is meanness and an
Mm.
unwillingness to give or to share. And if I remember
Okay.
right, and this comes from Andy Rotman, his book on the Preta Loka, was that there was someone who was begging for food or something, and this woman's like, "No, why would I do that? Let him just earn it himself." Very American idea, I think here. So she actually fed him shit. And then that was her
Mm.
curse, is that she just ate shit. And, but the Preta Loca are never satisfied. They're never satisfied.
Right.
Um, there's a film, not a zombie movie, but it's Samsara is the name of it. And I forget the
Mm.
filmmakers, but it's just imagery. And there's this section I would show in some of my courses, especially when I was teaching the Asian traditions. There's this whole section, I think, that epitomizes the Preta Loka, because it shows some of the factory settings of how our food comes to us, like the slaughter of chickens and everything, and but also it's interspersed with these people on assembly lines just making stuff and people buying stuff, and it
Mm,
ends with this people sitting at like a fast food place like a McDonald's, and they're all horribly overweight. And
yeah.
that's one of the things with being overweight like that, and especially eating junk food, is that even though they're eating all the time, they're not
Right.
really being nourished
Right.
because there's not that much nourishment in the food.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of ends with someone at the doctor's office, and the doctor is drawing a line down this man's body because they're going to do like a stomach bypass or something.
Hmm. Right.
And it's like, that's hungry ghost, man. It's all the consumption,
Hmm.
you know?
Right. Especially since those types of foods are actually designed to be addictive.
Mm-hmm.
There's chemicals
Mm-hmm.
in there that addict us to them, and they don't have the nutrients we need to sustain us. So we crave more and more and more all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've also seen where there is, and I think it was part of one of Michael Pollan's books, but there's like this special formula where they get to the bliss point of sugar, fat, and salt,
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
and it creates this need for more and more of it.
Mm.
And then they went on to talk about the logos like McDonald's and whatever other fast food place or brand out there that addiction is then triggered by the logo.
Mm.
Yes.
So you see the logo, oh my god, I have to have a Big Mac,
Mm.
Hmm.
and it's just perpetuating this, and then it puts us on the hook, like, well, you just don't have a lot of self-control,
Yeah.
Right. Right.
but you're
Which brings us
purposely addicting us.
right. Which brings us back to unconscious programming. And
Mm.
what is a
Mhm.
zombie? Somebody who's
Right.
not thinking about what they're really doing.
Yeah.
I was recalling this show. I think it was one of Jamie Oliver's Food Revolution,
Mm.
when that was out. I don't know how many, like over 10 years ago now. But they tried to in one of the schools they tried to take out the vending machines
Mm.
Mm,
with all the sugary stuff in it. And the parents were so mad about this that they were throwing their kids like little sugary treats over the fences. And I'm watching that thinking, that's addiction, and
mhm,
it's not
mhm.
just addiction that, we ourselves are going through. We're actually perpetuating that with our
Right.
kids,
Mm.
Hmm.
and
Yep.
saying, well, you're not going to be deprived of this. Here you go. And that, like, really shocked me out of,
Mhm.
thinking, oh my God, something's going on here. If they're doing that,
Right.
it's pretty bad.
Right. Yeah, there's more than just the individual addiction then. It's a social addiction.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
It's an enabling behavior from other people outside you that maintain that addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's like, we don't like to drink alone. That idea that we do
Mhm.
it as a group, it reinforces it group wise. Yeah, there you go. Uh,
Oh.
so we don't feel guilty about things. You
Right.
know,
Mm.
I think there's a subconscious idea that we know something is going on there, but we
Hmm.
don't
Right.
want to address it.
Yeah.
Right. And it may not even be subconscious or unconscious. It's just maybe habitual. So totally
Yeah.
unthinking.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Sugar is toxic, and
Hmm.
it is addictive. And I know that there's like the sugar store where you can go and just buy all this candy and jelly beans.
Yeah.
And my guess is that sometime in the future, people, if there are people then looking back, are going to be like, what were they thinking?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. We're in London right now. We walk by the M&M store and we're just shaking our heads.
Oh, I would totally go into the M&M store.
That's totally different than what we're just talking about.
Yeah, I'm not addicted. Um, but yeah, yeah, it's questioning the society though is difficult. I
Yeah.
mean, and we have a lot of models that of people who questioned society, and look what happens to them.
Hmm.
Look what happened to Socrates. Look what happened to Jesus. Look what happened to Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
so it's a lot easier just to eat that bag of M&Ms.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, something else that I think comes into play here is, and we're kind of touching on this in a sense, is kind of morality and
Mm.
Hmm.
ethic. And so
Mm.
I'm gonna move this a little bit to from movies to TV because there are other movies. Well, let me
Right.
first pause and ask if there's anything else in terms of the Dawn of the Dead and the consumption and consumerism, the malls and whatnot that you want to comment on.
No, I think I'm good on that one.
Okay.
Hmm.
I think the gore was elevated in
Yes.
that movie, substantially elevated.
Hmm.
Um, and there have been other zombie films, obviously, 28 Days,
Hmm.
not the Sandra Bullock movie. Um, and my understanding is they're doing a sequel to that, or another sequel to that coming out.
Right. There'll be a third one in a trilogy, I believe. 28 days, 28 days later,
Yeah,
28 weeks later, and 28 months later, or something.
yeah, something like that.
Somebody in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong. I watched the first one, but not the second one, and I know there's a third.
Yeah, I've only seen the first one.
I
Hmm.
think the next one coming out is 28 years later.
Okay,
Okay, okay. And
Yeah.
just for the record, 28 days later, these people are not dead. They're infected with a virus,
right.
Hmm.
right? The rage virus. And to me, that is one of the
Mm,
most scientifically realistic depictions of zombieism there is. If you're going to generate a source for mindless violence, a virus is a good way to do it, as long as the people are not dead.
yeah. Well, and in terms of rage, I don't
Mhm.
even think you need a virus in there.
Right, right.
Because there is an unthinking element to it. And I'll give an
Hmm.
example of a personal example. I was driving to one of the campuses where I teach, and this was in Denver, and the intersection was I was getting on Interstate 70.
Mm.
And this particular intersection is really busy, and a semi truck went through the light, but they clearly didn't have the time
Hmm.
to make it through the light. So they ended up blocking the intersection.
Ah.
So when it came my turn to go, I couldn't
Hmm.
because the semi truck was there. And I'm like, why in the world
Right,
would you do this? Obviously you didn't have enough time. You weren't thinking about anyone else. And then I started getting angry. And
right.
where the driver was, it was kind of parallel to where I was. So I flipped him off.
Hmm.
And we do that unthinkingly often when we're
Right.
Hmm.
driving. I was just, flip this person off, flip that person off, and everything. But I was watching. This guy saw me, and as soon as he saw, I saw him see my, middle finger there. He went into a rage, and as
Hmm.
soon as he did that, I felt horrible
Yeah.
because when I flipped him off, I was just being self-centered and I wasn't thinking.
Hmm.
And when I saw him go into a rage, I'm like, all that I have accomplished is creating more suffering in this world.
Right. Hmm.
But I think so many of us don't think about our actions and we're enraged all the, road rage
Right.
is a thing.
Yes.
Why? Why?
Mm. Well, that's a whole nother subject. We can go to a traffic apocalypse if you want. But there's a neurobiological reason for some of this, and that is we have neurons in our brain that are called mirror neurons,
Right,
and
right,
they're there to reflect what we perceive in other people doing.
right.
So if somebody seems to be angry, those mirror neurons will trip and make us angry as well. And
Yeah.
so in that way, the rage virus is right. It's not necessary. It can be contagious without it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that right now. You know, with this
Right.
polarization in, I can only speak to the American side of things, but there's this great polarization here, and everybody is, if you're on one side, you're enraged with the other side. You know, it doesn't matter which side you're on. It's just this mass anger and rage coming through. You
Right.
know, and we're not thinking.
Yeah.
We're not thinking clearly, and that allows us to be perfectly controlled,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
No matter what side you're on.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent point. Excellent point. And what I learned from my example was to just develop compassion and not react, because I don't know what he was going through.
Right.
I don't know why he did
With the
that.
traffic light.
Maybe he was late. Maybe, his mind was on something else, and I've certainly been guilty of doing things sort of mindlessly that I know had negative effects on others. And so it seems like one of the antidotes to the zombie apocalypse is just to be mindful of your own actions.
Right.
You know,
Right.
engage in,
Self-awareness.
self-awareness and self-inquiry. What do I think? Why do I think it? So, okay. There was also World War Z. I don't need to talk about that. I don't think we need to talk about that.
Well, just a quick note on that one. The
Okay.
movie depiction on it was a perfect example of zombies as an social animal
Mm,
because they're more
yeah.
dangerous as a group than they were as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you could see them working together to build bridges and towers to get at the other human beings.
Mm.
But that's all I have to say on that one.
Well, but now that I said, we don't need to talk about that. I remember the movie vaguely.
Mhm.
I did read the book first.
Yes.
And I just want to kind of put it out there. The source, because it was also, I don't know if they ever said it was a virus, but the source of it was like a lake in China. And it was something biological where someone had gone into this lake, if I remember correctly, and got infected somehow. And that's what was the original cause, which is interesting given what we know about COVID.
Right. Right.
Viruses, neither living nor dead.
Mhm.
Are there any other films? I know there's like 7 of the Living Dead, Night of the Living Dead.
I don't think any of the ones after that are worth talking about.
Yeah,
Well, the third one. Oh, which one was that?
Day of the Dead.
Where the zombies started gaining sapience.
Mm,
One of the zombies learned to shoot a gun.
huh.
I wish I could remember which one that was, but that was kind of a commentary as well in a way.
Yeah.
Eventually, you gain awareness on yourself anyway.
Well, it was
But-
interesting when I rewatched Night of the Living Dead. There actually was some thought because one of the zombies was trying to get in someplace and picked up like a rock or a brick or something to use as a tool to smash a window. So it was like, well, they weren't completely thoughtless.
Right, right.
I think and I don't remember. I haven't watched Day of the Dead or Dawn of the Dead for a very, very long time. So I don't remember if there was anything like that within that film.
Mm-hmm.
But.
Yeah.
All right, so television. The big one, of course, is The Walking Dead.
Right.
What do
And
we
the
have
most dangerous things in that movie were the human beings.
Yeah. What else do we have to say about The Walking Dead? I stopped watching.
Yeah.
A lot of people stopped watching. I forget.
Right after Glenn.
Yeah, I watched the rest of that season. But I don't think I watched anything after that. It just became a little bit too hopeless, I think.
Right. Right. Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the point of like, is it worth living through this, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Do you really want to be one of the people who's at the top of the food chain because you got through the zombie apocalypse? What was really left of the world?
Mm.
Right. And which brings
Mhm.
us also to The Last of Us. Have you seen that one?
I have.
I've
Okay.
not. I know it. I know about it, but I haven't
Mhm.
watched it.
Do we want to get into spoilers in this podcast, or should we let that be to
Well,
people and how that?
you can say spoiler warning,
Spoiler
but
warning. Plug your ears.
Stephanie hasn't seen it, so
Right.
do you want to?
I'm okay. You're all right.
Okay. Right. But the whole idea at the end is that the main character has a choice between giving this child over to scientific research to cure the cordyceps infection, or to save the child and doom humanity.
Right.
And he chose to doom humanity. Because what is the point of saving humanity if we're going to sacrifice children? It was kind of a part of the undertone on that one.
Yeah. Well, it's very anti-utilitarian,
Right.
because the utilitarian's going to say, yeah, sacrifice the kid.
Hmm. Right.
You know,
But then
and
what do we become at that point?
well, and I'm glad you mentioned this because I want to take it back, and we can kind of go back and forth on some of these to The Walking Dead because I saw the first few seasons of The Walking Dead as a kind of morality play.
Mm,
Hmm.
And I saw the first season, especially with Rick, in the first
right.
season, I saw that he was kind of embodying, I'm going to say, kind of a Kantian um, moral theory of that I have to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
Hmm.
He was following this moral code. Um, but then in the second season, you start getting a more of a utilitarian idea of, like, no, and this was with Shane, I think,
Right. Right.
that, what we can cause harm to a few for the benefit of the many.
Right.
Hmm.
And Rick wouldn't budge with that, you know.
Hmm.
Um, it was also, it turns into, after this, a Hobbesian nightmare of,
Hmm.
Thomas Hobbes, where there's no resources and it is a constant state of war and fighting over those resources. And everyone is only looking out for their own self interest.
Right.
And I think the
Yeah.
problem for me was they never got away from that.
Right.
Well, I kind of see it as the what Maslow's theory or hierarchy of needs,
Mm,
Mm,
where you have needs that aren't being met at this point.
mm,
And until those needs are met, you can't move forward with this higher level of morality.
mm,
Because right now, what's at stake is existence itself.
right.
right.
So it's okay, we got to get through this, and then we could build something else. But
Mm,
right now, we can't do that. We can't afford to do that. And I think that's what Rick learns
mm.
because he certainly becomes far more like Shane
Yeah.
towards the end of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
He does.
You
Yeah.
know, he realizes to save his own group, he's got to he's got to do some terrible things, and if we're trying to save the human race, and I mean, we could look at a lot of films for that. You're trying to save the human race. Battlestar Galactica was like that, right? What do you
Hmm.
do in that phase? Well, you have to meet certain needs first, and these needs can't be met until you eliminate that threat.
Right.
Um, so,
Mm.
Yeah. Um, what else? Anything else about The Walking Dead? I just can't believe that they're
uh,
still making Walking Dead even adjacent things.
Right.
You know.
Right. Well, they must have a pretty solid fan base then. There's a lot of Walking Dead zombies out there still watching it.
Well, the Walking Dead ended, although they were doing like I think
Right.
recently they did a Rick and Michonne
Hmm.
short,
Right.
and but yeah, the Walking Dead universe is still alive and well.
Right. Right.
But I know their numbers really fell off after
Hmm.
they killed off Glenn. Um,
Right.
Yeah. So The Last of Us, The Last of Us is different than that, and I like the idea that or the observation that you made, Jeremy, about saving the girl rather than all of humanity,
Hmm.
because that is very anti-utilitarian.
Right.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it seems very selfish of the main character to keep this girl alive because she was standing for the daughter that he'd lost, so he loved this girl.
Right.
But at the same time, it did represent something bigger than what he was just
Yeah.
feeling inside himself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know the game, so I don't know what's happening in the
Yeah.
second season or anything like that. But looking forward to it. There were some other zombie, and I've not seen these. There was iZombie.
Mm.
Um,
I know
that
very little about that one, but if I remember correctly, it is about a zombie falls in love with a living girl, and that brings him back to life.
No, that was a movie.
Oh, okay, that's
That
something
was a
else then. Okay,
movie.
never mind.
iZombie is something. If I remember right, it's a woman who gets turned into a zombie. So she, obviously starts craving brains.
Hmm.
But she's like something like a scientist, and if she eats the brain of someone or a section of it, she gets their memories or
Mm,
something like
interesting.
that. That's all I know. Someone can correct me.
Hmm.
I heard good things about it. I just never
Okay.
watched it. Then there was the Drew Barrymore Santa Clarita Diet,
Hmm.
um, and I
I
don't
don't know
know.
anything about that one.
Yeah, I don't
Right.
either. Although she apparently she wasn't like drooling, dragging her feet, zombie. She just craved human flesh. I
Mm.
guess. I don't know. It would be interesting because I'm familiar with Santa Clarita, so I kind of want to know a little bit about it. Um, there are a lot of zombies in California, I think. Um, so, just in terms of popular culture, I want to move to philosophy here.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to address zombies appear in other forms of media. So, I was thinking music.
Hmm.
Right before Steph joined our video here, I was listening to the Hooters, All You Zombies.
Hmm.
And I think that kind of harkens back to people just kind of going through the motions in their lives.
Hmm.
Um, the Cranberries, their song Zombie,
Hmm.
I think that has different connotations than the Hooters song.
Right. Yeah, there's also a subgenre of rockabilly called psychobilly or gothabilly,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of zombie themed stuff in there.
Huh. Because I know Psychobilly.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I could go back to, if you could go back to a movie for a second.
Yeah.
Uh, Only Lovers Left Alive. It's a vampire movie,
Mm.
Okay.
but the main, it's barely a vampire movie, but it is. The main two characters, one known as Adam, he's like been a vampire since probably the Middle Ages or something, and he refers to the humans, all the humans, as the zombies.
Hmm.
Hmm.
There's no zombies in the film, but he refers to them as zombies because they don't engage in any curiosity. They don't.
Hmm.
Um, they're ruining their own bodies. They're ruining the water. It's a very environmental idea
Hmm.
of, they persecuted all their great scientists. If they, you think of Galileo, or you think of how Newton was only valued for some of his scientific theories, while he was devalued in his, most of us don't even know his philosophical ideas. Um, so I thought it was a great approach to looking at, what his depression was caused by was their inability to engage in actual progress of intellectual thought.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. So again, we are the zombies.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Zombies are us. Um, so philosophy. Stephanie, you mentioned Zizek,
Hmm.
and Zizek talks about zombies. How?
Yeah. So Zizek is he's actually a Marxist philosopher, but
Mm-hmm.
he talks about how a lot of this stuff bubbles up in the pop culture of our world, right? A lot of the ideas that are important at this time, and zombies are one of them. But he talks about them as, if I could read for a moment, where is it? That the shock of encountering a zombie is not the shock of encountering a foreign entity, but the shock of being confronted by the disavowed foundation of our own humanness. And what I see there is this: there are certain things we do, just as a matter of habit, as a matter of maybe our chemical or biological makeup, and we don't like to think of ourselves as part of the animal world, that does
Right.
this, and this own disavowing of our own nature actually causes the horrors that we see around us. you
Hmm.
know um, i'm I'm trying to think of an example at the moment, but like, uh, we do things because we need comfort, or we do things because we're in a certain type of situation which doesn't allow us to, um, let me backtrack a bit. Our endless consumerism, what's the cause of that? Why are we doing that? Well, we need to address that. Why are we flying through that through inertia? But we disavow it. So if you disavow it, you can't address why you're doing it, right? You just keep doing it. And we're not encouraged to address those things. We're encouraged to simply continue consuming whatever it is that we want, rather
Hmm.
than questioning it. So it's that inability to question it that leads to, well, we can't stop consuming things. That's what our whole culture is based on.
Right.
So we have to continuously make things. It's this endless growth model that doesn't work. It's all part of that horror that we see simply because we won't even address our base nature.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I want to bring something in from Derrida, and it connects to what you were saying, and so we'll kind of go back and forth here, I think. And I'm no great Derrida scholar, so I was referring to something that I read many, many, many years ago. But I knew that there was reference to zombies in Derrida. And Derrida, of course, is associated with the deconstruction. And we don't have to get into that. But what he connects zombies with is this idea of undecidability.
Hmm.
And what I see this as is part of a duality, right? And so, um, what's happening, if I understand Derrida correctly, is zombies are challenging categories. Are they
Hmm.
alive or are they dead?
Hmm.
Right? Same thing with a virus. Is it living or is
Hmm.
it dead? Well, neither. Right? The living dead, that's a paradox. You know,
Hmm.
you can't be living and dead. You
Right.
can't be
Right.
dead and
Right.
living, right? So where do we put this in our categories? And where I kind of want to take this is categories are the one of the foundations of
Right.
rational thought. We
Hmm.
love our categories. Um, and the categories mark limits of order, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And what Derrida notes is that the zombie either has to become a proper corpse or a true living being. you know, because it has to decide what is it, one or the other. Um, and in that decision is a restoration of order.
Right.
Now, when I was looking through all of this, what came to my mind is the concept of dualisms and dualities.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going off topic a little bit, but I don't think that much. Maybe not at all. There was a ecofeminist philosopher, Val Plumwood, and what she did is she criticized dualistic thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
this dualistic thinking has its roots in Aristotelian logic and in categorical logic and categorical
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And it's one of the basic principles of reasoning: A, not A,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but yet, what Plumwood argued is that, and she wasn't arguing against principles of reason, but she said that this duality, this dualism, was used to create what she referred to as a logic of oppression. It was a logic of oppression,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the
Mm-hmm.
logic of colonialism. It is the
Yep.
logic of racism.
Yep.
Because what happens as soon as you start creating these categories of A, not A, you have self, other,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
and you recognize a distinction. Well, that's not me.
Right.
And I was trying to remember these, and I'm horrible about this, and I should know all of them. But the way that she kind of breaks it down, she uses, and I think she gets this from Nietzsche, she uses the language of master slave morality.
Mm-hmm.
So we can even say, master zombie morality if we want. Um, but what happens is that the master, the point is the master can't be a master without the slave,
Right.
right? But the master denies that relationship. And what the master does is the master dehumanizes the slave, and treats a slave as only having instrumental value and
Mm-hmm.
denies their inherent humanity.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stereotyping that goes on, because of all this otherizing,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
right? And the master backgrounds the slave and says, well, the slave, I don't need the slave. They aren't the source of my success.
Right.
That I don't need them. I background. I'm going to deny the necessity of them.
Right.
But this
Corporate
is,
CEOs.
yeah. Well, and this is kind of where I wanted to take us, because when we're talking about consumption and being seen as consumers and only as consumers, isn't this sort of same logic at play? And
Yes.
isn't that kind of what is dividing us right now, especially as a nation, that
Oh,
we are,
absolutely.
it's like self and other.
Mm-hmm.
And is that part of the symbolism of a zombie?
Mm-hmm.
That we look at the zombie as this sort of unthinking thing that just wants to consume. Wasn't that how we're being treated?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back to what Steph was saying about this is a denial of what we're really seeing inside ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. This idea that, we have corporations and political agencies that see us in one way. We are not the populace, we are the populace, but we are not anything but the consumer,
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
the, you know, the one who is going to, our only value is what we buy. Our only value is in, uh, certainly not in terms of participating in the democracy. It's certainly not in, um, the participation of what products should be on the market to keep them safe. We have agencies that are supposed to do that, but do they? Because it's all serving one eventual master,
Mm.
right? The corporate power that controls everything. You know the and which corporation really cares about the product they put out? How dangerous that product is for us?
Mhm.
How much sugar they're feeding us? Um, it's it's not at all concerned with our well-being, just our function as someone who buys.
Mm.
Mhm.
I think what famously George W. Bush
Yeah.
once said that you need to go out and buy things, as we're facing economic hardships, and
Mhm.
I can't remember what was going on at the time. I
It
can
was right
remember
after 9/11.
right after
He
9/11.
said, "Go out and shop."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's like, oh, okay, that's our value. You know,
Yeah.
it's very clear to me what how they think about us, and
Hmm.
Right.
it's not as any sort of participation other than buy something.
Yeah. Well, and it seems to me that this statement that I attributed to Derrida, and I don't think it's a direct quote, but that the zombie has to become either a proper corpse or a true living being. It seems that in the face of this consumerist culture, that the answer is clear. We have to become truly living beings. We have to start living our lives
Mhm.
rather than living this manufactured lie of consumption makes us happy.
Right. Right.
And then there's the idea: how do you extricate yourself from that system?
Right.
Like there is, that maybe that's the Watika, right? Part of it is
Mhm.
that you are embedded in something that isn't so easy to get out of without a
No.
lot of sacrifice to yourself.
Mhm. Right. Like the original zombie in Haiti, who was raised from the dead by a voodoo sorcerer from slavery into slavery.
Mm.
Sure, you can become aware and realize, oh, I'm not really a zombie. I'm not really a slave in this way, but you are still a slave.
Hmm. Maybe if we see ourselves as the living embodiment of being zombies. I mean, there's another way that they look at this in terms of the Loa, right?
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
the one who becomes becomes the vessel for the Loa. So they
Hmm.
give up their self to bring forth the spirit,
Mm.
Right. Something
and
greater.
that's yeah. So that's their participation in it. It's okay. This thing wants to come through. It can come through me, and
Hmm.
that's a little different idea of being a zombie. It's more, maybe we could look at it in terms of an idealism.
Hmm.
Being the vessel for a greater thought, a greater ideal.
Well, I kind of want to focus on this idea of choosing to become a true living being. Because
Hmm.
when I read that or think about that, for me, that implies becoming a spiritual being. Because when I think of spirituality, I think of spirituality as in the sense of being connected to, well, recognizing interconnection, but being connected to my own life and spirit itself. And when we are these consumers, we are separated from our own life force. And it seems to me that that's where the answer really lies, is that, and I think that there's a morality inherent in that. I think that it stirs up the desire to be the best that we can be. And when we start thinking about, well, what kind of person do I want to be?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to go a long way. I don't think we have to, I understand, and I understand the idea, this idea of, how do we escape? Don't we have to like break, pull the whole thing down? I think maybe we just have to wake up to our own lives and be present to our own lives and take the authority of our own lives. Maybe that's the starting point.
Right. The drop in the bucket.
Yeah, that's certainly, to me, the antidote for it all is to embrace who and what we are and become active participants in our own life, rather than passive, allowing everything about us to simply glide by. It's
Be defined by others.
Exactly.
I just realized that, Jeremy, you have a drink recipe. I'm sorry. This is a weird place to pull this up. But I was like, oh, wait, Jeremy has a video. I need to show the video. So I'm going to do that real quick.
Okay.
And then we can jump back into this and kind of wrap things up. But I think your video is the zombie tentacle?
Correct. It's a variant on the zombie. This one is created by Kraken Rum.
Okay, awesome. Well, let me pull that up and get that going.
Let's make the zombie tentacle from Kraken Rum. Hi, I'm Jer. Welcome to Kill Devil, where we focus on rum and cocktails. Today we are going to make the zombie tentacle from Kraken Rum. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning to the channel, welcome back. In either case, I hope you enjoy this drink. Have you ever wanted to make really good cocktails at home? I wanted to at one point too, and now I do. I'm not a professionally trained bartender, I'm just a guy who learned at home. And I'm at the point right now where my wife and friends and other people like my drinks more than the stuff they get at bars. So I must be doing something right. And I believe you can make good stuff at home too. The zombie tentacle seems to be the Kraken Rum's answer to the zombie cocktail. Makes sense. Zombies, tentacles, octopus. The name fits. A note on the rum. This is a Kraken Rum proprietary recipe, so if you're going to make the zombie tentacle, you really have to use their black spiced rum. If you want to use another rum, feel free to do so, but then you're no longer making their zombie tentacle. To make this drink, we are going to start with the Kraken black spiced rum. It's going to be 2 ounces, which is 60 milliliters. Then 3/4 ounces of lime juice. 3/4 ounces is 22.5 milliliters. 3/4 of an ounce of grapefruit juice. Again, 22.5 milliliters. 1/2 an ounce of orange curacao, and that's what the recipe specifically calls for. I don't have any orange curacao, so I'm going to be using an orange liqueur. Use what you like. 1/2 an ounce is 15 milliliters. 1/4 ounce of cinnamon syrup, and I do make my own cinnamon syrup. The recipe is here on the channel. Feel free to check it out. 1/4 ounce is 7.5 milliliters. And 1/4 ounce of grenadine. And I say and like this is the last thing. It's not. 1/4 ounce of grenadine. I make my own recipe here on the channel. This is a 1-to-1 grenadine. The recipe calls for a 2-to-1. That means use that recipe and cut the sugar in half. Anyway, 1/4 ounce is 7.5 milliliters. Okay. And the recipe calls for 2 dashes of absinthe. I do not have a dasher top for my absinthe, and I'm not just going to try to free pour that in here. I'm just going to put in like 3 drops, maybe 4. See how that does for us. And 1 dash of Angostura bitters, maybe 2. The first dash was kind of weak. I'm going to add my ice and give it a shake. Now I'm going to grab some more ice because I just put it all in the shaker. Now I'm going to fill my Collins glass with ice. Good. And I'm going to strain the drink into there. Oh, that looks just about perfect. Finally, the garnish. The garnish is a mint sprig. The mint that I can find is pretty weak, so I'm going to try and wake it up. And weak meaning it's kind of floppy. It's not the most attractive mint, but it'll have to do. And a straw. And there you have it. The zombie tentacle from Kraken Rum. Drink with good spirits. Question of the day. Have you made a zombie before at home? If so, what is the difference between the way you make a zombie and the way the zombie tentacle is made? Let me know in the comments down below. Note that there are ways to support the channel if you're so inclined. I do have social media links down below. If you want to follow me on any of those, feel free to do so. I have t-shirts available. If you want a t-shirt, contact me through those social medias and we'll make sure you get one. And finally, if you made it this far, give me a like, give me a thumbs up, give me a subscribe, all that good stuff for the Kraken Zombie Tentacle. Cheers.
Okay. So you put absinthe in that?
Yes, just a little bit.
So, well, my initial question was, I was thinking, well, do you see the fairies? But my guess is no. But then the next question is, does it make you see the zombies?
Ooh. And if I'm consuming this zombie, what does that make me?
Well, do you really want me to answer that, Jeremy?
I'm like a hot dog.
Talk about zombies. I was sitting here trying to like it, and I'm like, oh, wait, I'm not actually on that page. I'm just looking at it. I need to get out of my rut. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. 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 So, one of the things I know we're gonna wrap up here, but while that was playing, no offense, I did watch that before, Jeremy, but I took this as a opportunity to look at Paul Levy's most recent Wetiko book, Undreaming Wetiko, and there were a couple of things that kind of jumped out at me, and one is he asked the question, and this is in regards to Zombie Jesus. And he asks, he goes, isn't this the deeper meaning of the Christian myth that we can't have the resurrection without the crucifixion and the descent into the underworld? And so I'm curious because he constantly says that we should see Wetiko as a revelation. And I'm wondering if there is something similar in zombies. Are zombies a kind of revelation for us?
Right. Not only are we seeing what we don't want to see in a zombie, but our interaction with the zombie apocalypse itself kind of shows us who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the greater question is, how do we unzombify ourselves, right? Because in most of the things, it's like the only antidote is, get the brain or chop the head off. And we certainly don't want to do that. But is there a way to save ourselves from the zombie apocalypse?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we've talked about in other episodes, it's to embody ourselves, it's to, there needs to be an understanding, a revelation, how many people watch The Walking Dead and or watch any of the zombie films that we've talked about and never question it regarding themselves?
Right. Right.
So it's a matter of pulling uh, those films, those ideas, and recognizing some self meditation where we start recognizing that within ourselves. How do I skate by? Just getting through my day. How many of us have jobs we don't like that we just do whatever we have to do to get through it, and once we get off, we watch Netflix or don't really do anything. We don't do anything to change our circumstances.
Right.
And it's, or at least if we can't change the circumstance because, we have to eat, we have to survive, we need a roof over our head. Now, at least see where we can start breaking out of it. Start, what can I do to be more mindful? This mindfulness of what I'm doing throughout the day. Why do I do it? Start questioning every little thing you do and saying, okay, why do I do it? Is it necessary? And once you start doing that, maybe there's a revelation.
Mm-hmm. Right. Another thought is if you take zombies as sort of the social collective and you're just going along with the masses, whether it's commercialism or fashion trends or whatever, becoming an authentic human being for yourself, which is what Steph is kind of saying, being aware of who you really are and world, that becomes a way to fight that zombification.
Yeah, authenticity.
Yes.
Yeah, authenticity. And I noted a couple of things. One of the things that Paul Levy discussed was creativity. That the Wetiko virus, in many ways, robs us of our creativity, and I want to connect creativity to imagination, and I think that the system that we are in, I don't think that zombies are very imaginative. I mean, as individual, or if you can even say individuals, but I don't think that you have zombie artists, right?
Right.
And so, in connection with that self-reflection, which I agree with 100%, that we have to start engaging in that self-reflection, but we also need to start being creative beings, and we need to reclaim our imaginations. I often say that I feel like my imagination has been colonized, and I think this starts really young. Because it's like, I always think back to, me with the Star Wars figures, right? As a little kid. That's telling me the limits of my imagination, that I am within this, framework.
Right.
But the other thing that, and I'm going to see if I can articulate this. We've connected zombies with hive mind, in a sense. And I was wondering if that's kind of a shadow. And what I mean by this is that our emphasis, especially in the United States, is on our individuality.
Right.
But yet, we are all deeply interconnected. And it seems to me that the hive mind is a distortion of interconnection.
That's interesting.
Maybe in some ways it is causing fear of that interconnection. And if that makes sense, I don't know.
Yes.
I'm trying to articulate this as best as I can. But it seems that that's what the zombies also do.
Right.
So,
The zombies in some ways are all connected, especially if you go with the model of it, the fungal. They're all connected,
right.
and so that's a fear of connection with other human beings in a way.
Yeah. And so, in that sense, what we need to do is embrace our zombie natures. You need to
Right.
embrace the
Connect
shadow.
in
I mean,
authentic ways. Yeah.
yeah, we have to
Yeah.
embrace the shadow of the zombie, right?
Well,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yes.
and I think that's part of what Zizek was talking about. It's that disavowed part that's the horror. You
Yeah.
know, it's like, oh, I don't want to
Right.
embrace anything like that. It's shameful. Well, we have to at least say it exists within us and be aware of it in order to figure out, where we go from here. You can't correct the problem or you can't correct anything until you say, okay, this is part of our shadow. It's part of our nature in some way.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how do we address that now? And
Yeah.
we can't begin to hope to do anything until that's confronted.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
Yeah.
the
And
shame of the shadow is part of what I think is part of the worst things that we do,
right.
in our world.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It also seems that there is this fear that the zombies represent the fear of our animality, because
Mhm.
zombies,
Right. Definitely.
are so, it's that disorder. It's that, and
Mhm.
order is associated with society. And that
Mhm.
it's the society that creates the order and the barriers. And the zombies are kind of free from that in some aspect because they're not seen as human, that, they are just mere consumption, consumption machines of sorts. And it seems like one of the shadow aspects that we need to embrace here is our own animality, the part of us that wants to eat, that wants to feed.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about my own issues here in terms of, I'm a diabetic, okay? And I have to turn off that sugar addiction that I have,
Yeah.
or carb addiction.
Mhm.
But I can't begin to hope to do that unless I acknowledge that it's there.
Yeah.
Right.
And I know a lot of people who won't acknowledge it, and you can't do shit, if you don't say, hey, this is a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it seems like zombies are a kind of revelation, telling us, a lot about who
Mhm.
we are and what we need to embrace about ourselves and what we need to quit projecting onto others, because it's really easy on that projection to look at like, oh, all those Trump voters, they're just zombies. They're not thinking for themselves. They're all being led.
Right.
But we're all easily led in many ways.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would also say it's rejecting that that side of you, that zombie side of us, that allows, what allowed something like the rise of Trump. Well,
Yeah.
it's not just because there's a lot of MAGA followers. It's
Right.
because of a lot of the problems caused by the Democratic or liberal side of things that they ignored, um, for whatever reason. They didn't want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
They're, oh, I'm
Right.
not. I'm not like that. You're like that.
Right.
Well, no, a lot of us, even like if if you're a Democrat or a liberal or a third party, a lot of us have just gone along with whatever we've been told by people who maybe don't have our best interest at heart.
Yeah.
It's like, just because that we're aligned to the same party doesn't mean that what's going on within it is all good.
Right.
And that in and of itself causes that rise of the shadow, because we keep ignoring that part of ourselves.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I know we're running out of time here, but with MAGA, I can say that my hometown is sort of like MAGA central, literally. But I have sympathy. I can understand. And I understood that I think that people felt so frustrated and so isolated and alienated, that a vote for Trump was a Molotov cocktail into the halls of power. And I get it. I get it. And I think the caution is, especially for we liberals, a lot of liberals, is there's a lot of otherizing. And saying, well, these people, they're just stupid. They don't know what they're doing. But I always point to things like, this idea of the distrust of media. They're right to be distrustful. It's like, I'm all down with Noam Chomsky. I understand what's going on, that the media is not telling us the full story. So there's a core there that's true. It just gets turned in ways that aren't necessarily good. But it seems to me what we need to do is quit looking at the other as the zombie, as the mindless zombie, and recognize their humanity and develop our compassion and start listening, instead of saying, oh, well, that's just stupid. Start listening and finding those common grounds. And it seems to me that's the way that we can come out of the zombie apocalypse.
Right. Agreed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, we're pretty much at the end here. Any final thoughts or words that you would like to share?
No, I'm good.
I'm good.
All right. Well, once again, thank you both. I forget, I forgot to look at what's coming up next. I want to say it's the Book of Enoch, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, check the show notes down below. It may be listed there.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. But yeah, so thank you for anyone who's watching this or has followed us live. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell. And also don't forget to go to Jeremy's Kill Devil channel as well for lots of great drink recipes. So, all right. Until next month, folks. Until next month.
Bye.
Brains. Oh, I forgot Michael Jackson, Thriller. I was going to do the whole...
Oh, yeah. Thriller.
Lost it. Oh, well.
Yeah, well. All right.